It started with laughter. Not the kind that brings warmth, but the kind that escapes from a cracked soul. High-pitched, guttural, involuntary. It echoed through the cramped office like a siren no one could ignore. Arthur sat across from the social worker, tears streaking down his painted face. His eyes, though rimmed in black and smudged white, betrayed nothing but exhaustion. His laugh faded, slowly suffocated by the weight of silence. The woman didn't flinch. She'd seen this before. Joker said, "Is it just me, or is it getting crazier out there?" His voice, even when calm, trembled with something deeper. Something wounded. Social worker said, "It's certainly tense. People are upset, struggling, looking for work. The garbage strike feels like it's been going on forever." "These are tough times." She paused. "How about you? Still enjoying the job?" Arthur nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching in an attempt at a smile. He lied well. He had to. His notebook was worn, pages yellowed, corners curled. Inside, fractured jokes, confessions, obsessions. Words laced with sadness written in angry, meticulous script. Torn magazine clippings. Smut, mostly. And crude drawings grotesque, childlike, raw. The social worker flipped through it without comment, then paused. Social worker read aloud, "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life." Arthur didn't flinch. He smiled. Not because it was funny, because he didn't know what else to do. The streets of Gotham were louder than ever. Car horns screamed. Sirens wailed in the distance. Trash spilled onto sidewalks like rot beneath a wound. Arthur wore the mask again. The clown suit hung off his frame like loose skin. His painted-on frown cracked under sweat as he danced outside a music store, holding a sign that read, "Everything must go." Behind him, an old man pounded at a street piano. No one stopped. No one smiled. A group of teenagers circled him like hyenas. The first insult was verbal. The second was a kick. The third was a beating. They laughed as he fell, laughed harder as he bled, and when they stole his sign, disappearing into traffic, he chased after them, desperate not for vengeance but for validation. He never got the sign back. On the bus ride home, a child laughed at Arthur's peekaboo game. Innocence, untainted. But even that joy was poisoned. Woman on bus snapped, "Can you please stop bothering my kid?" He tried to explain. Couldn't. Laughter erupted from his throat, invited. Violent, painful, like a cough of the soul. He handed her a card. "Forgive my laughter. I have a condition." She didn't read it. She didn't care. No one did. Home was no sanctuary. His mother Penny barely glanced at him as he walked in. The apartment smelled of medication and faded dreams. She asked if the letter had arrived from Thomas Wayne. It hadn't. It never would. He made her dinner, crushed pills into her food, watched her eat with mechanical kindness. And when she praised Wayne as a savior, Arthur just nodded. Penny said, "He'll save us. You'll see. Thomas Wayne is a good man." Arthur didn't believe in good men. Not anymore. At night he wrote in his journal. A confession whispered to the walls. Joker muttered, "The worst part about having a mental illness is, people expect you to behave as if you don't." He underlined it. Twice. He went to Wayne Tower the next morning, letter in hand, dressed in faded hope. The receptionist laughed in his face. When he saw Thomas Wayne walking behind the glass, he pounded on it. Desperate. Pathetic. Security threw him into the street. He clung to the letter anyway. Back at work, Haha's talent booking hay was bruised. Quiet. Randall, a co-worker, handed him something heavy in a brown paper bag. Randall said, "It's a .38 snub nose. You need to protect yourself out there. Too many wackos." Arthur didn't want it, but he took it. He didn't have many friends. Then he lost his job. A gun slipped from his costume during a hospital gig for sick children. He tried to lie. Hoyt didn't believe him. Hoyt said, "Say it. Say I'm a fuck up and I'm fired." He said it. Not because it was true, but because that's what people do when no one listens. They say what others want to hear, and then they break. That night, Arthur stared into the mirror, dragged fingers across the corners of his mouth, forcing a smile. He didn't believe in smiles. Not real ones. Only masks. And powder. And paint. It was past midnight. Gotham whispered to itself in alleyways and burned quietly behind closed doors. The city wasn't asleep, it was sedated. Broken. Arthur wasn't. He sat on the couch, the television flickering like a distant fire. His face was still painted, his wig tossed beside him like a discarded identity. The .38 revolver rested in his palm. Heavy. Cold. Too real. He pointed it at the wall. Then the television. Then his own reflection in the darkened window. His hand trembled. Click. Blam. A single shot rang out, accidental, loud, final. He froze, mouth open, eyes wide. Smoke curled out from the barrel like a whispered threat. His mother shouted from the bedroom. Penny called. Happy. What was that? Arthur shouted back. What? He scrambled to shove the gun under the couch cushions, frantically turning the volume up on the television. Penny yelled. That noise. Did you hear that noise? Arthur replied, I'm watching an old war movie. Penny snapped. Turn it down. He did. Then peeked into her room, like a child caught lying. She was sitting upright in the dark. Arthur said gently, The Americans are really giving it to the Japs. He kissed her on the forehead, apologized, and walked away. He couldn't sleep, so he wrote. In the notebook, beneath broken jokes and crossed-out punchlines, he added something new. Arthur murmured, Why didn't Randall tell me the gun was loaded? With my luck, I could have killed someone. Pause, I could have killed myself. He stared at the words, then crossed out, could have, wrote, should have. Arthur muttered again, I should kill myself. The pen pressed deeper than ink. The next morning, he didn't go to work. He didn't have a job. He watched the front of his own apartment building from across the street like a stranger staking out a crime scene, his hood pulled low, waiting. Then he saw her. Sophie. She stepped outside with her daughter, Gigi, her coat buttoned, her face calm. Arthur followed. From a distance. Through crowded streets. Onto a subway platform. She never looked back. He watched her smoke. He watched her work. He watched her like she was the last good thing in the city. And then he approached. Inside the bank, she was counting bills behind a plexiglass window. He stood there, awkward, trying to smile. Arthur said, Hello, I'd like to open an account. She looked up, startled. Sophie asked, Hey, what are you doing up here? Arthur answered, Didn't know you worked at a bank. Pretty glamorous, right? She laughed, politely. He didn't. Arthur said, I'm a comedian. I do stand up. Sophie replied, Really? I had no idea. Arthur continued, always making funny observations, always watching, for my next bit. Then he froze. He didn't know what else to say. So he told her he said hi to his mom. She looked confused. Then her boss stepped in, heavy hand on her shoulder. Arthur left, clumsily, muttering something about forgetting his ID. But inside he burned. That night he sat alone in a comedy club. Notebook open. He wasn't laughing. Everyone else was. The comic on stage was killing it, the room bursting with laughter. But Arthur just watched, studying, scribbling, timing every beat like a scientist dissecting a dying frog. He copied rhythm, not joy. He couldn't tell the difference. Later, he tore a flyer off the wall. Open mic night. Thursdays, 10 p.m. He practiced. He practiced like a man possessed. In front of the mirror, in front of no one, with a fake mic, fake crowd, fake smile. Arthur whispered, "Knock, knock." No response. He laughed. It wasn't the right laugh. So he tried again. Arthur whispered again, "Knock, knock." His voice trembled. His hand shook. But he couldn't stop. Because maybe, if he could just get the joke right, the world would finally listen. It began underground. Not with a laugh, but with the sound of stale fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Arthur sat on the near-empty subway, face painted, red nose discarded in his lap. Across from him, 3 drunk men in suits shouted and laughed Wall Street types, out of place in the grime of Gotham's underground veins. They weren't watching Arthur. At first. They were harassing a young woman, flicking fries at her, mocking her silence. Arthur watched then, without warning, he began to laugh. Not a chuckle. A broken, uncontrollable cackle erupting from somewhere deep inside. The men turned. Wall Street guy said, "Something funny, asshole?" Arthur shook his head, still laughing, hands trembling. They got up. One grabbed him by the collar. Another slapped the clown wig from his seat. The woman escaped between subway cars. Arthur stayed. The first punch sent his head into the metal bar behind him. The second, to his ribs. The third never landed. He reached into his coat and pulled the gun. The first shot silenced the car. The second dropped the man in front of him. The third hit the one trying to crawl away. The last man ran. Arthur followed. Through the tunnels, through the echoing nothingness, and shot him in the back. Then again, and again. Click. Empty. He stood there, panting, the smell of smoke and blood heavy in the air. Then, he ran. In the apartment bathroom, Arthur washed off the makeup like peeling skin. The paint swirled down the synchred white blue and left only the man behind. He stared at his reflection and danced. Slowly, carefully, arms swaying, feet gliding across the floor like he was finally free from gravity. Not Arthur anymore. Something else. The next day, the murders were everywhere. News vans choked the streets. Television anchors called it senseless. Protesters wore clown masks in the streets, unaware they were mimicking a killer. Penny didn't know. Arthur sat beside her hospital bed, quiet, calm. Penny said, "He's going to help us, Happy. Thomas Wayne is a good man, if he knew how he lived." Arthur didn't respond. He just watched the heart monitor rise and fall. Rhythmic. Predictable. Unlike him, that night, he snuck into Wayne Manor. Not to rob it. To see him. Thomas Wayne. The man his mother swore had once cared for them. The man she believed was Arthur's father. Arthur saw Bruce first. Small, alone, standing near the gates. Arthur tried to make him smile, pantomimed magic, twisted a flower from wire. Then Alfred appeared. Suspicious, dismissive, firm. Arthur asked, "Does Thomas Wayne know Penny Fleck?" Alfred replied, "She worked here, that's all." Arthur insisted, "She says he's my father." Alfred's eyes narrowed. Alfred said, "Your mother is delusional. She was committed. Asked to see her file." He shut the gate. Arthur didn't move. He just smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. Later, in a theatre full of tuxedos and pearls, Arthur waited by the exit like a phantom in the wings. As Thomas Wayne stepped out, Arthur followed him into the marble echo of a bathroom. Arthur said, "Mr. Wayne, two think I'm your son." Wayne turned, paused, then punched him. Hard. Thomas Wayne said, "Your mother is insane, and so are you. Stay away from my family." Arthur fell to the floor. His nose bled. His eyes didn't. They stared. Not with pain, but clarity. Back at home, Arthur searched the fridge. Found nothing. Then found the scissors. A knock at the door. Randall. With Gary. Fake sympathy in his voice. Randall said, "Heard about your mom, man. Just wanted to check in." Arthur let them in. Locked the door. Then stabbed Randall in the neck. The scissors slid in clean. The wall caught the spray. Gary screamed, frozen. But Arthur didn't hurt him. Arthur said, "You were always nice to me, Gary," and helped him unlock the door to leave. Then turned back toward the mirror and painted his face. One final time. On the way to the Murray Franklin show, he danced down the staircase like he'd just been born. The city was his now, the rhythm his own. But two detectives were waiting at the bottom. They called out. He ran, through traffic, through the chaos, through a city that had already begun to crack. On the train, full of clown-masked protesters, the detectives followed, and were swallowed whole. The mob erupted. Arthur vanished. Backstage, the lights were warm. The makeup room was quiet. Arthur sat in front of the mirror. Red suit, green hair, yellow vest, white face. He drew the smile last. Slowly, carefully, then turned to Murray's producer. Arthur said, "When you introduce me, can you call me Joker? That's what you call me, right? On the show?" He nodded. The lights flicked on. The music swelled. Murray Franklin smiled at the camera. Murray said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Joker." He stepped out, danced, bowed, smiled. What followed wasn't comedy. It was confession. He spoke of loneliness, of being ignored, of the city leaving people behind. And then, Joker said, "What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash?" Murray said, "I think we've had enough of your jokes." Joker said, "You get what you fucking deserve." The gun rose. One shot. Murray fell. And the world changed. The riot didn't begin with fire. It began with silence. Then the screen went dark. Then the sirens. Joker stood atop the wreckage of a burning car, surrounded by masked chaos, sirens and screams drowning each other out. He smiled, blood on his face, red as laughter, then bowed to a city that finally looked back and saw him.